نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. Alhamdulillah. In our Fiqh of Everyday Life class, we have been looking at different topics and discussing the limits of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala regarding them. Today's class we will be looking at the 7 limbs. Now you might be thinking, why are there 7? We'll explain. But for each limb of the body, there are limits as well. Right? So for the eyes and for the tongue and for the, right, and we'll describe what they are, that there are limits of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala regarding all of them. And this is part of the beautiful quality of our tradition, is that in every situation we have a plethora of guidance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Whereas many other traditions that a person is left to make, to give an opinion or to guess what is best in the situation, and many people guess wrong. Right? So that the fact that we have this guidance, we know what Allah wants in every single situation, and that is a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? And it's by means of these 7 limbs that our hearts manifest their qualities. Right? So Imam Al-Ghazali alayhi rahmatullahi ta'ala, he mentions that every one of the limbs is essentially a window toward the heart. So whatever we do with our limbs, it affects the state of our heart. It affects our soul, our spirit. But the opposite is also true, that depending on the state of one's heart, the purity of one's soul, their actions will manifest pure and beautiful actions. So it's a two-way street. It's like a highway with 2 sides. That if we do good actions with our limbs, then it brings a good state to the heart. And if we have a good state in our heart, then our actions on our limbs will be good as well. Right? So we have to constantly protect our limbs from doing bad things. Right? And these bad things, they really corrupt the soul. They corrupt the purity of the soul, and they block the heart from being able to witness the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because it is these sins that cause the heart to be veiled. Right? And the veil of the heart, right, the Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned in the hadith, and it's also mentioned in the Quran, كَلَّا بَرَّانَ عَلَى قُلُوبِهِمْ بِمَا كَانُوا يَكْسِبُونَ كَلَّا إِنَّهُمْ عَنْ رَبِّهِمْ يَوْمَئِذٍ لَمَحْجُوبُونَ. That indeed their hearts are rusted over because of what they have earned, meaning their evil actions. They indeed on that day, meaning the day of judgment, they will be veiled from their Lord. They will be veiled from their Lord. Mahjub, hijab is the veil. Right? So because of the sins done with the limbs, the heart becomes veiled from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whereas good deeds enlighten the heart and give the heart light and clarity and remove these veils until, right? And this is why the example of a mirror is constantly given to the heart. That a mirror, if you have a dirty mirror, can you see yourself in the picture? No. Right? If you have a mirror but it's facing the wrong direction, can you see yourself? If you have a mirror but it's kind of concave, it's not straight, it's concave or convex, right? What happens? You look really strange, right? You know those clown mirrors that they have at circus or something? And you look at it and you look like you're 5 feet bigger than you usually are, right? Or really tiny, right? So the mirror of the heart is similar, and the sins, they cause the mirror of the heart to be dirty, right? So the divine lights and the divine great majesty cannot reflect in that light. You can't see it. You're blinded. It's there, but you can't see it. Right? It's like the person who is sick, they have a fever, and they're very sick, and you give them a 5-course, and you give them a 5-star dinner that's made by the greatest chef in the world, right? They won't enjoy it because they're sick, not because the food is not good. Right? So they won't taste the splendor of a delicious steak perfectly cooked, right? Perfect medium rare, exactly the right temperature with the perfect sear on the sides. Right? They won't enjoy it because of their sickness, not because the steak does not live up to its description. Steak is beautiful, the steak is delicious, right? But they're sick, and that's why they can't experience. Same thing, Allah is great, whether we agree or not, or to the extent that we agree or not, whether we have certainty in that or not. Allah is perfect in every way, and Allah is the light of the heavens and the earth, right? But because we're sick, we can't realize it, right? And it's the sins that cause us to be sick, right? So this goes back again to taqwa, and this is this whole course is based on utilizing or making taqwa practical, living taqwa in life, right? Living a mindful life, a life of taqwa, right? So taqwa has those three levels that we mentioned before: that leaving the sin first and foremost, leaving that which is haram, that which is clearly a sin. Second is leaving that which is disliked, that which has sinful, that inclines more to the side of it being a sin than it does to it being permissible. Right? And then the third is to leave anything that distracts us or causes us to be heedless of Allah. Right? So applying those three criteria to the 7 limbs, right? The 7 limbs are, right, the eyes, the ears, the stomach, the tongue, the privates, and the hands and the feet. Right? Some of these we've already talked about. We talked about the stomach. We'll slightly talk about it today. We talked about the stomach when we talked about the matters of food and drink. We've talked about the tongue and extensively, so we won't be repeating that today. Right? First, we want to look at the eyes, right? And there are many ahadith on the idea of the nadhra, of the glance, that what one looks at has an effect on their heart, either in the good or the bad. Right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in Surah Isra, I believe, Surah Al-Isra, right? قُلْ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ يَغُضُّوا مِنْ أَبْصَارِهِمْ وَيَحْفَظُوا فُرُوجَهُمْ ذَلِكَ خَيْرٌ لَهُمْ وَذَلِكَ أَزْكَى لَهُمْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ خَبِيرٌ بِمَا يَصْنَعُونَ. Tell the believers, the believing men, to lower their gazes and guard their chastity that is pure for them. Truly Allah is all aware of what they do, of what you do, right? Of what they do. Actually, this translation is not very good. Maybe that's my fault. So the eyes are created for a certain reason. Just like all the limbs, they're all created for a specific task or a specific job. Right? And to use them for that specific task is what we are commanded to do, and it is a gratitude for these limbs. Right? Is it better to be able to see the world or not be able to see anything? Which one? Which one's the blessing? To be able to see, right? Imam Ghazali says to use the blessing of Allah in His disobedience is the highest extent of ingratitude. Right? Imagine somebody says, here's a nice lemon meringue pie. You like lemon meringue pie? No, it's delicious. I won a pie eating, I don't know if I won, it was a long time ago, a pie eating contest, and it was a lemon meringue pie. Couldn't use our hands though. It was only face first. So if somebody gives you a pie, right? What are you supposed to respond with? Somebody baked you a pie, they put all the effort in and they give it to you. What are you supposed to do? Say thank you. Yeah. Imagine if you threw it in their face. That's essentially what we're doing. Allah gave us eyesight. Right? It's a blessing, a huge blessing. And then we use it to disobey Him. We use it to draw His divine wrath upon us. Right? That is the furthest extent of ingratitude. It's worse than just not saying thank you. And if you took the pie and just didn't do anything, right? Smashing it in their face would be even worse. Right? It's worse than just not being grateful. It's ingratitude. So Right, so the sins that relate to the eye is, right, looking at anything sinful. Right, looking at anything sinful, right, and looking at anything that is not permissible to look at with desire, right, to look at it with desire, with, right, lust. Okay. Right, so looking at the haram, we already discussed a bit of this, right, when we talked about the awrah, right, the level of clothing that a person must have, and, right, the amount of nakedness that must be covered, right. So to look at someone's awrah, or to look at any pictures of nudity or any of these things is haram, 100% haram, and it really harms the heart severely. Now, aside from that, along with looking at the haram would be watching someone do something that is haram. Right? So like watching people kill each other, or watching people, right, engaged in sin, right? That would be similar to that. Now, if you look at something permissible, right, something that's permissible, for instance, you look at somebody but they're properly clothed, permissible. You look at somebody's face. Their face is not an awrah, right? Even of the other gender, but to look at it with lust is impermissible, right? So it is obligatory to lower the gaze from that which is directly haram, or even that which is halal, but it's done out of lust. Okay. Right? Even if the place that you're looking at is not awrah. Right? And again, what is the intention? Why are you staring at so and so? Why are you looking at the other person? Right? Right. So that would be, right, that would be also impermissible. But there are other aspects. We mentioned before that, having taqwa from that which causes the heart to be heedless of Allah. Right. So it is recommended to lower one's gaze, meaning to look away, right, when luxurious things are there. Right, so if somebody drives by with a Ferrari or a really expensive car, right, it's recommended not to look at it. It's recommended. Why? Because one of the worst sins, as the Prophet ﷺ said, that the source of all sin is love of worldliness, love of material things. So if you look at it and you don't care at all about it, that's different. But most people can't do that. Most people see it and their heart inclines toward it. And to the extent that one's heart inclines toward created things, material things that don't matter to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right, to that extent they will lose, right, in their heart the love of Allah. And because the love of Allah and the love of worldliness cannot be in the same heart together. They cannot combine. It's like water and fire. They can't be together. And if one's heart is completely filled with worldly love, right, then, right, love of Allah is not possible until they remove that love. Right? It's like somebody who comes to you, right, and they said, "Can I have some water?" And they give you a cup that's already filled to the brim. What do? You can't give them anything. What are you going to do? Right? They won't be able to put anything in the cup because their cup is already full. Right? So if the heart is already filled with love of worldly things, right, things that don't matter to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, things that don't really have any true importance, like what's the importance of a Ferrari? What can I do with a Ferrari that I can't do, right? That I need to do, but I can't do it with a regular car? Anything? Actually, it's highly impractical. Imagine going grocery shopping when the trunk is in the front of the car and it's this big. Right? You can't go grocery shopping. Right? Speed bumps become a huge task. I had a friend once, he had to drive sideways in order to get over a speed bump. Poor guy, he took him like 15 minutes to get to his house from the entrance of his neighborhood. Right? All because of this, right, so-called, right, nice car. Like, well, what? Right, what benefit does it have whatsoever? What meaning does it have? It has no meaning whatsoever. I'm not just like picking on Ferraris, but in general, this is how we have to look at worldly things that have no true importance to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? We take, right, of the world that which we need, that which has a benefit, that which is practical, that which we need. Buy a house, right? Yes, you need enough rooms to, right, for your family to live comfortably. You need maybe some extra rooms to have guests, right? To have your house nice is good, it's beautiful, right? But to have 15 houses and a house that has 35 rooms, which you only, right, open 5 of them at the most when anybody comes over, right? And 15 bathrooms, what's the point? What can I do in that house that I need to do that I couldn't do in a normal house? Right? Except for like running back and forth down the hallways and yell because of the echo. So, right, looking at worldly things, it's recommended to lower the gaze, right? To protect the heart from falling into love of worldliness. Right? And also, another thing is recommended to lower the gaze from is, right, a type of visual gossip. Right? What are those people doing over there? Right? Oh, look at those people. I think they're about to fight. Right? I think they're arguing. And then staring at them, right? You're in the middle of Walmart or something, right? And you're staring at these people because they're kind of raising their voices slightly. Right? No benefit whatsoever. Right? It distracts the heart from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? And most of like magazines and these things are all about this. So-and-so married this person and they're doing divorce and they moved from this country to this country and now they're going to have a baby, and who cares? Right? Is Allah going to ask me on the Day of Judgment any of that? Right? No. Right? Does it benefit me in this world? Right? Even like if we just talk about completely secular reasons, do I benefit at all in this world from knowing that so-and-so married so-and-so actor? Nothing, right? Zero. Right? It's all from the base desires of the human to be distracted, the human distraction, which we're trying to overcome in our relationship with Allah. Right? But the eye was created for certain things, right? So, right, what we should be looking at is, right, to look at things with iman, with faith. Right, to look at the creation and realize, right, to reflect on the fact that Allah created all of this. Look at the sunsets, look at the stars, buy a telescope, right? Look at the stars, look at the creation. Allah commands us to look at these things in the Quran, right? And He says, أَفَلَا يَنظُرُونَ, right? Do they not look at the camel and how it was created, and at the sky and how it was raised as a roof, and at the earth and how it was stretched out, and at the mountains, right, how they are firmly rooted. Right? Look at these things, right, because it increases the faith, because all of these things are the doing of Allah. All of them. Right? And if you can, as they say, the fruit, the value of the tree is understood by the fruit. The value of the tree is understood by the fruit. Right, so if all of this creation, this beautiful creation with perfect complexity, right, is the fruit of the divine greatness, then who is Allah? SubhanAllah. Right, and all of what we know right now is just the first sky, Sama'ud Dunya, everything that we know, all the 500 billion galaxies that they assume that is out there. Right, and even the scientists themselves, they declare that what we have seen so far, billions of galaxies, what we have seen so far, we believe is only 5% of what is actually out there. Right? All of that is just the first heaven, and the first heaven compared to the second is like a ring in the desert, and the second and the first combined compared to the third, like a ring in the desert. Right? And then those to the fourth, and then those to the fifth, and those to the sixth, and all of the 7 heavens together combined compared to the throne of Allah is like a ring in the desert. Who is Allah? Right? So this is what the eyes are for, to observe, right, the fruits of Allah's greatness in the world. Right? And that applies to people. Like human beings are one of the most amazing creations. Right? It also, right, the eyes are also to read the Quran. Right? The Prophet said, "A'tu uyunakum haddan من المصحف أو كما قال صلى الله عليه وسلم, I forget the exact words, that give your eyes their portion of the Quran, of the Mus'haf, right? To look in the Quran and to read, right? Looking at good things, right? Looking with reflection, looking with concern. All of these things are part of the role of the eyes, because all of these things have a good effect on the heart. And one of the greatest things to do is to look at the faces of righteous people. To look at the faces of righteous people, right? For you to look at them or for them to look at you. Imam al-Haddad says is one of the greatest causes for the desire to come to Allah, right, in your heart. Right, so that's the eyes. The next is the ears. And right, there are similar discussions, right? The basis is that we're using it for that which will benefit our soul, that which Allah created it for, and we're not using it for the haram. So Allah says, وَلَا تَقْفُ مَا لَيْسَ لَكَ بِهِ عِلْمٍ إِنَّ السَّمْعَ وَالْبَصَرَ وَالْفُؤَادَ كُلُّ أُولَٰئِكَ كَانَ عَنْهُ مَسْئُولًا. Right, truly, Allah will be, right, the last part of it is that the hearing, the sight, and the heart, right, one will be called to account for all of them. One will be called to account for all of them. Mas'ula means you'll be asked about all of them. Your hearing, your sight, and your heart. And these are the two biggest windows to the heart, right? The eyes and the ears. Now, if you think about it, the eyes, you have a protection no matter where you are. Right? There's multiple protections. One, you can look away. You can turn your head moves. Right? We're not like owls, but it does move a significant amount. Right? You can look away. Right? But even if you're completely surrounded by haram, you still have one more way to get out of it. What is it? Close your eyes. Right? Now, hearing is much different. Hearing is much different. Right? You can't, technically you could plug your ears, but it's not as realistic as closing your eyes. It's not that easy. Right? So, abstaining from the haram from in regards to listening, right, would necessitate that you don't go to certain places or around certain people that would be doing the haram that you could hear. Right? So there's more caution needed in hearing than it is in seeing. Right? Because even though both of them have, and each of them has a huge effect on the heart. Constantly listening to people lie, right, and backbiting and cursing and, right, all of these things, it really hurts the heart. And you can't unhear it. Right? Right, so listening to the sinful, again, listening to anything that is sinful to say, right? Right? Anything that is sinful for you to say yourself, it is haram to listen to it. Listen to other people say it. Right? So it's not permissible for us to lie, for us to backbite, for us to gossip. We talked about a few of these when we talked about the sins of the tongue. Right? So to listen to other people doing that, right, and not objecting to it, or not, right, at least changing the subject and, right, feeling and disliking it in the heart, right, then one will be party to that sin. Right, but also, right, if one has good company, a good community, right, and they keep themselves around respectable people and people who are dignified, they won't have to fall into a lot of that. Right? Even if your friends are non-Muslim, right, but they're dignified people and they have good character, right, they won't backbite everyone and lie every 2 minutes and curse and this, right? Right, so you'll be saved from most of that. But even on top of that, right, it is recommended not to listen to useless things. Not to listen to useless things. And useless things are those things which have no benefit whatsoever in this life or in the next. Right, so what's the ruling of listening to a podcast on personality traits? Or a podcast on business management? Permissible. Right? And if you're doing it with good intentions, it may even be rewarding. So it's not useless. Right? But what's the ruling of listening to people talk about so-and-so married so-and-so and this and that, and what do you think they're going to do? Are they going to get divorced or not? Pointless. Useless, right? And it's distracting, really distracting to the heart. Right, so not listening to the useless things. It's called laghwun in Arabic. Right, laghwun. Laghwun is bila fa'ida, that which has no benefit, even neither worldly benefit. Right? So-and-so's baby's name and whether they're going to get divorced or not has no benefit in your life, this world. It won't increase your rank at your job. It won't bring you higher in the hierarchy of financial status. It's not going to get you a better job because you know so-and-so married so-and-so. Useless. Right? So, right, and Allah talks about this constantly in the Quran, about the righteous people, that إِذَا مَرُّوا بِاللَّغْوِ مَرُّوا كِرَامًا. And when they pass by vain speech, speech that has no benefit, right? Laghwun, when they pass by it with dignity. This is children speak like that. Like, not even like dignified, mature children would not speak like that. Meaning like childish people. Right? There's a difference between being young and being childish. Right? Being childish when you're a child is not that bad. Right? That's pretty much normal. But being childish when you're 20, right, that's ridiculous. And people don't tend to like that. Right? So to pass by with dignity, they walk away. Right? And another verse, Allah in chapter 28, verse 55, Allah says, وَإِذَا سَمِعُوا اللَّغْوَ, when they hear vain speech, أَعْرَضُوا عَنْهُ, they turn away from it. وَقَالُوا, and they say, لَنَا أَعْمَالُنَا وَلَكُمْ أَعْمَالُكُمْ. Right? For us is what we do, and for you is what you do. سَلَامٌ عَلَيْكُمْ لَا نَبْتَغِي الْجَاهِلِينَ. Right? Salamu alaykum. Right? We don't want to deal with ignorant people. We don't seek to deal with ignorant people. Right? Not out of arrogance, but why even get involved? Right? But the ears were created, right, for very beautiful reasons. One is hearing the guidance of the Quran, hearing the guidance of the Prophet, hearing the guidance, right, of our scholars, right? Listening to the good, listening to people's concerns and trying to help them, right? Listening to the beautiful sounds that are there, right? Listening to the birds, listening to the water, listening to nasheeds, right, about Allah's greatness and the Prophet ﷺ, right? All of these things, listening to the poetry and the praise of the Prophet ﷺ, right? All of these things are beneficial. Right? The stomach, which we wouldn't, right, in our modern definition of limbs, you wouldn't consider the stomach a limb because it's not really an appendage. Right? It's inside, it's not really outside. Right? But it's considered one of the 7 limbs and one of the deadliest. We talked about this a lot, so we're not going to take too much time. Right? We talked about, right, that in Allah tayyibun la yaqbul illa tayyiba, that Allah is pure and He only accepts that which is pure. Right? And the context of the hadith is regarding food. Right? Allah. Right? So sinful eating that which is haram, right, really corrupts the soul. Right? As we mentioned, that whoever eats of the haram, their limbs will disobey whether they choose to or not to. Right? And the Prophet said, "La yadkhulul jannata jasadun ghudiya bil haram." Right? A body that is nourished by haram will not enter paradise. Right? So the stomach has a direct effect on the heart. Right? But there are virtues to eating. Right? There are sunnahs to eating with people. Right? The Sahaba would generally never eat alone. Never. Right? They would, even if they had food and they were by themselves, they would go search for someone to share it with. Right? So there's social meanings to eating as well. Right? And Allah actually gave them, right, consoled them in the Quran. Right? لا جناح عليكم أن تأكلوا جميعا أو أشتاتا. There's no harm on you if you eat together or if you eat alone. Right? So Allah said that to the Sahabi because He was sad that He couldn't find anyone to eat with. Right? It wasn't that it's not an encouragement to eat alone. Right? But the basis of eating is caution. Right? That, especially when it comes to meat. That meat is haram until you can verify that it's halal. Right? With the conditions that we mentioned in previous courses. Right? Same thing with ingredients that are known to be haram, check. Right? If it's something you're going to eat all the time, definitely check. Right? The problem is that someone wants to eat, right? They want to be cautious, but they want to eat everything. Right? They want to go, I want this candy, I want this candy, I want this candy, right? But at the same time, they want to be cautious. So they spend 20 minutes in the candy aisle reading all these crazy scientific words and ingredients. Right? 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 So that which is clearly haram, leave it. Gelatin, stuff like that, leave it off. Right? There are many alternatives. Generally, majority of the things are halal. Whether they're healthy or not, that's a different story. So the stomach, right? Worship and knowledge while eating the haram is like building on a garbage dump. Right? It's like building a building on top of a pile of trash. Right? Even if you construct it, it's not going to be worth much. Right? Nobody wants to come rent your building because it smells. Right? Right? So, right, doing good deeds while eating haram food is very counterproductive, because the heart is not going to be able to receive the blessings of those good deeds because of it being soiled by the stomach. Right, so just a quick kind of tangent about caution. Right, there are really 5 levels of caution, and many people they under the guise of caution, under the claim of caution, they put themselves into undue difficulty, and they make their life so much harder. Right, so caution, real caution, needs knowledge. There's no such thing as caution without knowledge. Impossible to be cautious if you don't know what the rulings are. Right? Because caution is not choosing the hardest possible option. Right? Like, for instance, okay, I prayed my salat, but maybe I forgot something. So what's the hardest possible option? Repeat all my prayers for the past month. Right? Is that caution? No, that's just foolishness. Right? That's what shaitan wants, because people, they do that, they act on that kind of caution, and then they get burned out and they don't pray at all. Right? Shaitan wins. Right? But true caution is to choose that which is most likely pleasing to Allah. Right? Which in some situations means not to do anything. Right? Like this situation, baseless, right? Possibility, maybe there's a 5% chance that I didn't pray properly. Right? So what's most pleasing to Allah? Ignore it. Most pleasing to Allah. That's your caution. Ignore it. Right? So there are 5 levels of caution. Right? It is obligatory to have caution when it applies to that which is clearly haram. Right? And that's just basic taqwa. It's not really called caution. Right? That's just basic taqwa. Leave the haram. It's not a matter of caution. Right? But it's emphasized to have caution when there's a reasonable possibility of something being haram. Right? Right? Like, for instance, right, ingredients that could possibly be from pork, right, from pig, and stuff like that. Right? It's reasonably possible to be haram. Right? There's a likelihood of being haram. Right? Then it's emphasized, but it's not obligatory. It's emphasized. Right? It's encouraged, right, when there is reasonable possibility of being something being disliked. Right? Makruh tahriman, as we talked about before. Right? That would be sinful, but right, to a lesser degree than the haram. But there is discouraged and impermissible caution. It's haram to be cautious in some situations. Right? And this is where people fall. Right? Most people who are cautious don't have an issue with the first 3, because they act on caution anyway. Right? And for the person who has 0 caution, that's problematic as well. Right? And just do everything they want, and then, oh wait, is this halal or not? Right? As an afterthought, they think about, oh wait, should I have done that? Right? That's just wrong as well. So there's a balance. Right? To be cautious, especially like in regards to food. Right? Food the basis is caution. It's discouraged to be caution when there is no reasonable basis why this thing should be haram. Right? You have no reasonable reason. There's no reason why this should be haram. Like, for instance, somebody told me, right, that be careful. don't drink filtered water. I said, what are you talking about? He said, they line the filters with pork fat. Like, is that even true? I highly doubt that the water would taste the same if it went through a filter that was made out of pork fat. I'm pretty sure that's far-fetched. Right, so is there any reasonable basis for me to believe such a person like that? Or for any claim like that? Like don't breathe. Why not? Because the Prophet said that the dust of interest will be in the air. Right? Or because there's pollution in the air and the pollution is haram. So you're participating in the haram by breathing. So don't breathe. Right? There's no reasonable basis why any of that makes sense. Right? So, right, in that case, it would be discouraged for me to act on that, because it's just lunacy, right? Especially if, right, there's good or benefits that I'm leaving by acting on that. Right? Right? So if it results in me leaving something that could have been beneficial to me, right, then that's problematic as well. Right? That's discouraged. Right? Now, it is impermissible if there's zero basis. Right? If there's no basis whatsoever, without any basis, and it leads to a haram or a wrong. Right? Now, this happens, and some may not realize it, right? But to have false assumptions about other people's food, for instance, right? Like, for instance, somebody comes to you and they give you the lemon meringue pie. Right? What's the ruling of lemons? It's halal to eat lemons? Yes. Right? What's the ruling of, like, flour, butter, eggs to make the halal? Right? What's the ruling of, like, sour cream? I'm not giving like a whole recipe here, right? But, right, you understand the basis is, right, that this thing was not. Right, there's no reason why I should assume that this thing was made out of haram things, right? So say my neighbor, right, his name is Dave, right? Dave, non-Muslim Dave. Right, he gives me a vegan, if that's even a vegetarian lemon meringue pie, and he knows that I don't eat haram meat, so he gives it to me. Right, so I get the pie, right, but then, right, but what if he touched his pork, right, the pork that he was going to eat, and then he made my pie? And then he kneaded the dough. That is a completely, that's an assumption with no proof whatsoever. Right? That would be discouraged. Right? All that what if, anything that has a what if in it, ignore it. Right? But it would be impermissible, right, if that leads to waswasa, right, constant misgivings, right, or it leads to causing other people harm. Right? So if for instance I said, right, don't eat from this place. Right, why? Because I don't like the guy. Maybe his food's haram. Right, what is the guy having? Right, the guy being, right, not smiling at you when you come to his store, right, have to do with the halalness of his food? Nothing. But you've caused that person harm, because now his customers won't come. Right, even though the food's completely halal, or even. Right, so like there's these websites where you can make like a comment about a restaurant or a comment about a store, like don't go to that place, right, because it might not be halal. Right, what's your proof? The guy's mean, right? Or the guy prays different than me, right? Right? That would be haram. That would be haram because you're causing, with no actual basis, you're causing harm on other people, right? And you're causing that person harm. Tamam. Right? And this applies to sharing like long, right, detailed lists of haram food ingredients or haram foods and stuff. Right? It causes harm to people. Right? And most of what's on there is disagreed upon anyway. Right? And rarely any list that would be absolutely certain and unanimously haram would be very short. Right? It would be a short list, not an extremely long list like some of these lists. Right? Plus, right, You can encourage caution, but is it obligatory to be cautious on some scientifically disagreed upon ingredient? Not necessarily. So that applies. We talked about a lot about the stomach, right? But the basis of food is caution, right? And caution only applies to that which has a reasonable basis. There's some proof that this thing could be wrong. There's some proof, right? And right, like for instance, you go to a place and they serve pork and beef, right? But you look in the back and they only have one wok, right? One pan. They don't even have other pans in it. There's just one pan, right? And the guy before you just ordered pork, like some pork fried rice or something like that. Right? Now you have some sort of proof of why this should be something you should be careful. There's some proof. Right? Generally, places that are shady, right, are shady. Right? Or you have some reasonable proof that this person has no idea what the definition of halal is. Right? Like I went to a pizza place once, and it said halal on the door. So I said, "Are your ingredients halal?" And he said, "Yeah, we don't serve any pork here." So some red lights start going off in your head, like, uh-oh, right, this doesn't sound right. Like, I remember a friend of mine, we were talking about halal corn, and he laughed at me. I was a new Muslim. So I asked him, is this corn halal? Because he told me that you can only eat halal. And so stuff like that, ignore. The tongue we've already discussed, right, in one whole class. The tongue, they say that jirmuhu saghir wa jurmuhu kabir. Its size is small, but its crimes are big. Now, right, the private parts, right, this is a youth class, so we're going to edit it slightly, but it is important because, right, and this applies also to, right, some of the things that we talked about regarding the eyes. Right, so the same verse that was quoted there is quoted here. Right, tell the believing men to lower their gaze, right, meaning not look at the haram, or to look at anything with desire. Right, وَيَحْفَظُوا فُرُوجَهُمْ, and guard their, literal translation, and guard their private parts. Right, guard their chastity. Right, ذَلِكَ أَزْكَى لَهُمْ, that is more pure for them, or that is purer for them. Right, so now, so Imam Ghazali, he gives us a nice principle that guarding the private parts is only possible, right, if one guards their gaze, they guard their eyes, right, because as they say, that it starts first with a glance, and then that glance kind of like plants a seed inside, right, and then it starts to be watered by thinking. Right, thinking, right, and then, right, that leads a person to fall into their desires, and then actions happen. Right, so what are the limits? Right, the sins that are involved are, right, all fulfillment of desire outside of the marital relationship. That's pretty much, right. That's only after being married is it permissible to fulfill a natural sexual desire. That's it. Okay, only in the scope of marriage. Right? So that excludes, right, having any fulfillment of desire with someone you're not married to, but it also includes having any fulfillment of desire by oneself. Right? Self-gratification is impermissible according to all of the four madhabs, right? Which is, right, masturbation, right, is impermissible according to all four madhabs, right? And its social and psychological harms are huge, right? And there's many books and treatises and, right, articles written about the addictions of masturbation, the social harms of it, and so forth. Right now, right, humans have desire, right, and those who are not married, right? They need to be more cautious than those who are married because they don't have an outlet for that desire. That's permissible. Right? Now, there are ways to control the desire. Right? That first, right, if we talk about that process that we just mentioned, right, that if we guard our thoughts, right, to guard the thoughts, guard the gaze, automatically makes it easier to guard, right, from these things. Right? So to not think about, right, the other opposite gender, and it applies to the same gender as well. Right? So desire, regardless of what it is, right, if a person has a desire for someone else, that desire itself is not sinful. If they just find in their heart a desire for something, right, but acting on it and thinking about it, and right, then that's where, right, that's a voluntary action, and that's sinful. Right? Involuntary thoughts are not sinful. Just cast them away, astaghfirullah, and continue. Right? So, right, guarding one's thoughts, guarding one's gaze, right? So not looking at the haram will make it easier for one to not, right, to lessen one's desires. Also, right, one of the biggest factors of people being succumbed to their desires is heedlessness. Heedlessness, right? Forgetting Allah, right, strengthens the nafs, it strengthens the desires. Whereas remembrance of Allah calms the desires. Right? So if a person does find themselves overwhelmed with desire, they should make a lot of dhikr. They should remember Allah a lot. Second is halal food. Right? Haram food builds desire, and it leads to the haram. Right? But also the quantity of food also does that too. So eating a lot of food builds the desire. Right? In at-ta'am yuqawwi shahwatan nahami, as Imam Busayri says, that giving food increases the desire of animals. So if you, like people who breed animals, what they do, they feed them a lot, and then they, yeah, you know the next part. Right? But one of the greatest dhikrs to do, as our beloved teacher Habib Abdurrahman bin Ali al-Mashhur, the son of the Mufti of Tarim, Habib Ali al-Mashhur, alayhi rahmatullahi ta'ala, he mentioned that one of the greatest dhikrs that one can do if they're overwhelmed with desire is to close their eyes, right, to look up, right, obviously, right, to put their head up, right, and to say Allah, but stretch it as long as you possibly can, right, and have, right, to end on the sukoon at the end, Allah, right, but to do that as loud as you can without any sound, if that makes any sense. Can you scream in your heart? Try it. Scream inside your heart. Just yell something. Can you? It's possible. Right, so say in your heart. Well, let's all do it together. In your heart, as long as you can. Right? Allah, but in your heart, silently. Ready? Go. Right, so to do that twice, he said, right, kills desires, right, kills these worldly, right, animalistic desires. Right, and if you really do that consistently, wow, right, you will enter into a state that you've never known before. Right? Because, right, directly mentioning the name of Allah, right, is extremely powerful. Right? I would not recommend people doing it like extraordinary amounts. Like, don't go home and do 100,000 of that. Right? You would probably burn up or something. You probably self-combust, right, because of the greatness of that. Right? Whereas things like Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah, these are very cool. They're like over-the-counter prescription dhikr. Whereas like Allah, right, that's like you need a prescription from someone to do that, or you will be harmed. Right? But do it if you need it, right? But don't do like 100,000, 200,000, then you'll probably be flying. So, we'll just close with the hands and the feet are the last two. Right, so the hands, when they talk about the sins of the hands, there are some that are obvious, like punching someone in the face. Right, that's obviously a sin of the hand. Right, but it also applies to, right, to our dealings. Right, so they usually mention like the sin of taking or giving or acquiring money in a haram way as a sin of the hand, like stealing. Right, or taking interest, or right. But there are some obvious sins of the hand, like touching someone of the opposite gender that you're not related to or married to, right? Or right, slapping someone who you just met on the train in the face because they stepped on your toe accidentally, right? Haram. All of these things are haram, and that's clear. But it also applies to right taking, right, and giving. Right. So any hitting that causes harm, either physical harm or emotional harm, right, is haram. Right, hitting is haram if it causes physical harm or emotional harm. Right, that is specifically haram. Right, but right, so when it comes to discipline, right, now this applies more to parents than it does to youth, but youth will eventually be their own parents. Right? And many people, the only thing that they know how to parent is how they were raised. Right? So you end up, right, the old idea that right, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Right? That if a child was raised in an abusive parental relationship, that they were beat and they were yelled at as a child, right, whether they like it or not, they have a high tendency to do that to their children, because that's all they know. Right? And it's a deadly cycle. It's a deadly cycle. Right? And it takes someone to break the cycle. Someone has to learn. Someone has to get out of that. Right? So children, right, are a trust from Allah. They're very vulnerable. They depend on the compassion of their parents. Right? But at the same time, right, the parent can't just let the child do whatever they want, because right, they'll never survive in the world. They'll never survive in their own religion. Right? Their nafs will be out of control, and they won't be able to control it when they get older. And that's the fault of the parent. Right? So the parents have a dual role. That one, they can't abandon that trust, right, of the child. They have to treat the child with love and care and compassion. But at the same time, they have to discipline the child. They have to teach the child discipline. Right? Sometimes, in some cultures, discipline equals beating, punishments. Right? Harming and slapping the child or hitting the child sometimes with a weapon involved. Right? And I'm from Latin America lineage, and I know that firsthand, that some families, they beat the children. They beat them. Right, so where is the balance? Right, some people say that if you leave aside the rod, the stick, then you've spoiled the child. Right, that's one extreme. Then unless you hit them, they're going to be spoiled. Right, and the other extreme is do whatever you want. My child is infallible. Right, the child is running around in Walmart taking things out of people's carts and throwing them on the floor. Right, and the parent is just like, oh, isn't he so cute? Right? He's so expressive of his emotions. No, that's not allowed. You cannot do that. The child needs to know where the limits are. Right? So there's two extremes. Right? The Prophet ﷺ, he is a moderate person. Right? But he taught, right? And there's a difference between the highest virtues and that which is permissible. Okay. Right? The basis is any hitting that causes harm, either physical, it causes pain, it causes bruising, broken limbs, right? Or emotional harm that causes the child to be emotionally damaged, right, is haram. Let's just put that out there. It is haram. Right? And this applies to the parent to the child, the teacher to the child, right? Anything. Right? A husband to the wife to the husband, the wife to the child. Any of this is haram. Right now, if a person needs to discipline their child, right, and nothing is working whatsoever, right, then there is an allowance for hitting, right, only because of its consequence to leading to that child learning discipline, right? But right, so the Prophet ﷺ, he said, for example, that muru awladakum bis salati wa hum abna'u sab'a, that command your children to pray when they're 7, wadribuhum alayha wa hum abna'u 10, right, and discipline them for it when they're 10. Right, the word for discipline here is wadrib, right, to hit. Right, now in Arabic, verbs, they contain 2 types of meanings. One is the actual, the action itself, the hitting, right, or the consequence that is sought by doing that thing, which is, in this case, what is the goal when you hit the child? To discipline them, right? So what is meant is the second. Right, so that's why it's translated as discipline them instead of hit them. Right, discipline them when they're 10. Right? If that goal can be reached without hitting, that's the sunnah. If that goal can be reached without hitting, that's the sunnah. Right, so if you can, right, and why is that the sunnah? Because the Prophet, as Sayyidah Aisha said, he never hit a woman, he never hit a child, he never hit a servant, he never even hit an animal in his entire life. The only time he ever hit was in battle. An actual battle. Right, so that is the sunnah, is to, if you can achieve discipline without hitting whatsoever, that's the sunnah. Right, hitting is not a sunnah. Right, but if you can't, you tried your best, everything is going wrong, the child is just, right, the child is just being evil, right, and will not listen, right, then there is permission. There's permission in the Sharia to discipline the child by hitting with the criteria that it does not cause any pain, it does not cause any harm physically or emotionally, right? It does not cause, right, any bruising or broken limbs. It's not done on any sensitive parts of the body, so the face, right, or any parts that are sensitive, and it's done maximally to three times, and there's no weapon. It has to be with the hand. Right, so what kind of hit would that be? You can't use the face. Yeah, so it would not be a sign of violence. It would be a showing of disapproval. Right? So if you can do that, obviously with the face or, right, with the tone of the voice, that would be better than hitting. But if you need to just kind of like wake up, child, stop being so evil, right, then, right, obviously this is like a last case scenario, right, then it's permitted. It's not even a virtue, it's permitted, right? Right, however, generally, if a parent does their job right from the beginning, they won't have to do that. They won't have to do it. And there's other ways, right, right, there's other consequences one can give to the child, take away their toys, right, and not allow them to go outside. Right. Those, they may be effective as well. I had a friend, he's like 7, he's almost 8 feet tall, right, he's a huge guy. He used to be a priest, then he became Muslim. Right, so he had kids, and they were really riled up and super energetic. Right. It's kind of cool. Right, so he said that one of my kids, right, even if I hit him, right, he would laugh at me. That was the child. If I hit him, he would laugh at me and ask for more. He would think I'm playing with him. Right, but he said that one day I had an idea. Right, so I grabbed him and I hugged him. Right, I put one leg on this side and one leg on this side, right, and his arms were locked inside, right, in the hug, and I just held him gently. It wasn't like a squeeze. Right? Don't squeeze your children, right? He just held them, right? And the whole time he said, "I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you," and the child, like, he was kicking and screaming, and then eventually he fell asleep. Right, so now anytime that the child is just being too bad and the parent wants to discipline him, he says, instead of "I'm going to hit you," he says, "I'm going to hug you." You know, "You want me to hug you again?" And the child just immediately quiet, right, collected, completely just disciplined. Right? So different children are different, right? But it is not allowed to harm people, to hurt people. Right? And child abuse is haram. Spousal abuse is haram, whether it be physical or emotional. So yelling at your child, you're a terrible person, you're a bad child, that's haram. Right? That child's going to grow up, right, socially and mentally, right, destroyed. And same thing with spousal abuse. The feet, right? The feet are a sin, and as far as they carry us toward the sin. So they're really, right, unless you consider kicking someone, right? And kicking someone is just as haram as hitting someone, right? And don't kick people. Right? So our steps are counted either for us or against us. Right? And Allah says in the Quran, يَوْمَئِذٍ تُحَدِّثُ أَخْبَارَهَا بِأَنَّ رَبَّكَ أَوْحَى that the earth on the Day of Judgment will tell Allah all the things that happened on it. So-and-so did this on me at this place. So-and-so did something haram here on this place. And so-and-so did this. Right? And it will tell the good deeds. So-and-so prayed here, and then prayed here, and then prayed here, and then gave charity here, and then built a masjid here. Right? So the earth will testify on the Day of Judgment. Allah. Right? So walking toward the sinful is, right, sinful. Right? Because now it's become not only a thought, but an action. Right? So if somebody, it just came to one's mind, you know what, I should go over there and slap him. Right? It's not a sin until you're, right, as long as it's just a thought, because a thought is not voluntary. You can't control it. So the thought comes, you're supposed to say, astaghfirullah. Why would I do that? That's not halal. It's not even sunnah. Right? Right? But once you start considering it, you know what? He does deserve a good slapping. Right? Right? And then maybe I should do it like this. Maybe I should come up from behind. Maybe I should. Right? So now it becomes voluntary. You're accepting that and you're considering it. As soon as you take that step, right? As soon as you start considering it, it becomes a sin. Right? But once you take the step, that step is sinful because you're going toward a sinful act. Right? But there are many blessings to walking toward good deeds. And the Prophet said, right, that one of the actions that erases sins and raises one's rank is kathratul khuta ila al-masajid, walking a lot of steps to the masjid, meaning to the prayer. Right? And the Prophet, he said, bashir al-masha'ina fi dhulami ila al-masajidi bi nurin tamin yawm al-qiyamah. They give glad tidings of those who walk in the darkness to the masjid, give them glad tidings of a complete light on the Day of Judgment. Right? So those who walk to the Fajr prayer in the dark, right? Right? And some of the Sahaba, they wanted to move their house close to the masjid. And the Prophet said, no, stay where you are because your footsteps will be written as good deeds for you. Inshallah, next class we'll be talking about the heart. Right? And all of these limbs are, right, essentially windows to the heart. So the way that we use them affects the heart. Right? And we'll talk about, right, next week the sins of the heart, which the scholars have mentioned. They have told us that the sins of the heart are worse than the sins of the limbs. And the good deeds of the heart are better than the good deeds of the limbs. Right, so we'll discuss that next week, inshaAllah ta'ala. Wa sallallahu ta'ala ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Are there any questions? Anything online, Siri? No. Are there any questions online? Okay. So, let's just jump straight into the